Oh, sorry, we didn't get the memo.
Here, take my photo.
See a thumbs up or anything. I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. All right, welcome everyone to the Thursday, April 3rd meeting of the Business and Community Affairs Committee. Today we have two items on the agenda. The first being a continued discussion regarding creation of a tax increment finance master plan to include a TIF for the Griffin property. And with us today, we have Ms. Walker back to help present, and so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. If I start coughing or anything, I'm really sorry. I'm having allergies. I'm allergic to springtime in Oklahoma, so I'm going to try and get through it without coughing, but just in case. We last talked about this in January, and it always seems like seems like a lot happens between the discussions, so I always want to review, but we've kind of gone back and looked at, what makes an area eligible for a TIF, what kind of project costs can you have, and we've looked at all those areas for different areas of town, including this Griffin TIF. In November, we came down to kind of two options, really, Griffin and South Norman. Griffin is really large, as is the South Norman TIF potentially, and kind of talked through that. And then in January, we looked at Griffin specifically, but we were waiting at that time on the RDG proposal to come back with some ideas for how this might develop. And so what I had done at that time really relied on an old ULI study from 2015, which wasn't bad, but wasn't updated. So we've come back now that we've got that updated information, just with some general estimates. I think we're still sort of at the higher level stage. I know you all were interested in a couple of proposals, and I've got both of those in here, and we can talk about those. So again, this proposal is a large project area with 3 increment districts within it. So this is the project area, extends up to Rock Creek Roads. Sutton Wilderness and Griffin Park is incorporated into that. It goes over to Flood, I believe that's just past Flood Avenue. And then down to Acres and over the railroad tracks, keeping in mind the center city boundaries there on that south side.
What's the western boundary?
I wish I could zoom in. That might be Berry.
It is.
Yeah. Berry for the project area. And again, the project area is really large. This is any increment that's generated from the 3 increment districts could be spent within this project area. We have 3 increment districts proposed. This one is not going to be a high revenue generator. This is Flood Avenue coming down into downtown Norman. We have commercial properties along that area. We have a few vacant properties, a lot of properties that are probably prime for redevelopment, but nothing's really happening there too much, hasn't happened there in quite a while. So our numbers are pretty conservative on that. Maybe a $2 million investment over 25 years, just in some redevelopment. It's really, really hard to say what it might be, and don't want to overshoot, but also don't want to, undercut our budget either. So trying to keep that in mind. Thinking primarily retail space might redevelop along Flood, about 20,000 square feet. Something to consider is if this is not a significant revenue generation area, it could still be in the project area. And if you have enough revenue generated from the other 2 increment districts, you may not need this increment district. And you may just kind of be able to do some improvements that spur some development without siphoning off any of those revenues from that property.
I know we've talked about the idea of triggering different zones. Is that something that could be done with that area? I mean, I know you've got a 25-year clock for the project area, but do you have to start the 25-year clock on each district within the property?
You can start them each at different times.
Okay.
They'll each get 25 years.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that one could just kind of sit and be triggered later. If we know we're getting ready to do some public improvements that would spur some development, that would give it an opportunity to generate some increment.
Okay.
So increment district number 7, this is the Porter Hospital area on down to the east of the railroad tracks, downtown Norman section of Main Street. Just capturing some of those. And I know we have, obviously, the Porter Hospital campus at some point is going to redevelop, and it may become, maybe placed on the tax rolls. We also have some housing developments that we know are being talked about downtown, and I've met with one of those developers and kind of talked through the proposal for potential redevelopment downtown and also on the city's Gray Street properties. So that's something that we talked through, and I kind of had that in mind in looking at these numbers. On this, let me go back to the map. You can see where you see Andrews Park, the larger green shape, and then of course the city complex south of that. That from Gray, and I believe even the city complex, is included in the Center City TIF. And so one thing you could think about, the Center City TIF dollars are really for infrastructure, and it's more public improvements, sewer, water line, roads, that kind of thing. And this property, because it was city-owned, was never intended or never considered as part of the base assessed value when setting up the Center City TIF. So one option might be to redraw the Center City TIF boundaries, so it would be a minor amendment, and take out the city-owned property there and include it in a Griffin TIF. And that way, if you have, some potential developments that need development assistance to meet the goals of the city council for residential downtown, then you have a revenue source for that. So that's something to think about. Now, I know, I found on my last sad bullet that we've got a Senate bill out there that may impact some of our decision-making on this parcel, particularly with regards to the homeless shelter. So that remains to be seen whether or not that project would go forward. But I know you all have received a proposal specifically for that property and the property on the south side of Gray. So wanted to get that included and kind of note that for the group.
Gotcha. Real quick, before I get to Councilmember Holman, can you explain the difference between a minor and a major amendment on the TIF? I mean, does that take a council vote?
It'll take a council vote. It doesn't have to go back through the statutory review committee. Generally, it's the 5% rule. So a 5% increase in boundaries or a 5% increase in value.
Okay.
Generally triggers the full process for amendment, more than 5%. Less than 5% or 5% or less is a minor amendment. Taking out some of the boundaries is also a minor amendment.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. I think Councilmember Holman was first. Did you raise?
Okay, so Center City TIF goes all the way to Tonawa. If it's between Gray and the alleyway between Gray and Tonawa, that's what I'm thinking. And so the Gray Street property would be in the Center City TIF, but the police department is not.
Right.
And so we would be taking what part out of
You
the
would
Center
be-
City, or?
You're right. You'd be removing the portion that's in the Center City and putting it into the Griffin TIF. And this is just city-owned property. So we can look at those boundaries a little more closely if that's something you guys are interested in. But that might be one way to provide some development assistance to meet that goal of more housing downtown.
So Center City TIF did not include the lot across the street from here on Gray that we own.
It is in Center City, yeah.
So okay, why would we want to take it out of Center City if Center City is calculating that or based off of development there contributing to that TIF?
Because the project plan for Center City is pretty limited in terms of expenditures for infrastructure only. And it may be that a developer to fit housing in that small area, I think it's like a third of an acre maybe, would need some development assistance other than public infrastructure.
Okay.
And so if that's something council's interested in, moving that into the Griffin TIF would allow for some increment generation to be used for a different purpose than what's allowed by the Center City TIF.
To encourage a specific development perhaps
Right.
on this property. Okay,
Right.
okay. And then the issue with the Senate bill, the way I understand it is it would have a negative impact because we wouldn't be able to move that shelter from its current location ever.
Well,
If we did, we wouldn't be able to open it.
I've not done a map, but just judging by the radius that's set forth in that bill, I think your options are gonna be more limited. And so my thinking was that may limit your ability to move it out of downtown because it grandfathers in existing shelters from what I understand. It's passed the Senate, it's in the House, it's been referred to the County and Municipal Government Committee. It's referred there, I think, on April 1st. And I looked today, nothing else has happened yet, so we'll find out what they do with it. But that's just a potential issue to keep in mind when we talk about moving these boundaries. It may not you may not be able to put a housing development there if you desire to keep the shelter open.
And if we closed it, we might not be able to open one anywhere else.
Right.
So, okay. Well, just something important for all downtown business owners to be aware of is this bill could make it so we can't ever move it from this location, potentially. So if you know anybody in the House of Representatives, you might give them a call. Okay, that's interesting to know.
Councilmember Green.
In relation to Senate Bill 484, I don't know, does it keep its title in the House too? So 484. I asked about the developer, if he was gonna have a problem if it stays there for a lot longer than anticipated. I was told no. So my question would be, would it be able to like cut that part out for the shelter and see what the rest of it would generate as a plan B?
Yeah, we can do that. Okay, and then the big one is increment district number 8 or C. We do ABC, given that some of the other increment districts are kind of up in the air right now, 6 and 7 with the arena. But this includes all the way down to Alameda, although as we talked last time, this area south of Maine was envisioned by the ULI report as more of a wellness campus community center, so it may not be as tax contributing as the portion north of Maine. So I'm just really looking at, in updating these numbers, looking at what RDG came up with north of Maine and kind of leaving that alone. So if that were to develop in another way, these would obviously be really conservative numbers. Last time when we looked at it, we talked about maybe a potential development estimate of $80 million, and that was just me looking at the ULI report and making my best guess. Didn't have a lot of data in terms of number of units, how many square feet, that kind of thing. But now with these concepts, we do have some better things to use for our educated guessing. The RDG concept 2, and I'll show you the map of that, had 269 small site single family units, 567 walk-ups, 740 in the multifamily Texas donut style, 48 in mixed use upper level residential, 48 in historic. I didn't include those in calculations just because I'm unclear on whether that would be tax generating, probably not. And so when you look at that and you look at what that might look like being phased in over 25 years, because it's not going to all be built at once, got some estimates, about $200 a square foot to construct, which serves as the basis for your initial property tax valuation. We're looking at a potential development estimate over $200 million if all that were to be built out. It's a tremendous amount of housing.
Could you, sorry, so several hands, but I had a question as well. Can you explain basically how it's gonna go from $0 assessed value because it's state-owned property to then being on the tax rolls, and basically that jump from 0 to 200 million?
Yeah, so that's exactly what it will be, because when you set up a TIF, you go in and you value the property as is. When we first did the UNP TIF, we set a value for all of that land, 585 acres. It was $906,000, I believe. But there was no other value to that because it wasn't taxable. So it's relatively low. And in this case, because none of the property has been sold at this point, it's probably going to be closer to 0.
Right.
So anything that's generated over and above that, anything new that's built there is 100% additional value, and it could be subject to the increment.
Okay.
What I've assumed is 100% property value increment, and where there's sales tax increment, 60%.
Okay.
So the city still gets some of that sales tax dollars, some of those sales tax dollars in. So all of this housing, because it is so much in terms of ad valorem, could really lead to a lot of revenue.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so that's just the estimate of the development. I'll get to like what that looks like when you get into property tax generation and increment generation here in a minute. But in concept 3, you have 242 single family units, 849 walk-ups, 3-story walk-ups, 600 multifamily units, 86 mixed use upper level units. So again, even more units here 849 three-story walk-up units is pretty amazing.
That's the one that I think most of us said that we liked the most.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah, and I watched the meeting and then I had some discussions. I understood concept 2 and 3 were maybe the ones that you guys were most interested in, so that's why I focused on those.
3 had the most housing, so I think
Mm-hmm.
that's-
Tremendous amount. And of course, it's not going to develop overnight. It'll develop over time, but that's, in excess of $250 million in development right there.
Councilor Gray.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we were pushing RDG for housing on this more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's great for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's great for your ad valorem. It's great for the sales tax generation outside of the district because all of those new residents will be shopping all around that area of Norman, not just within the district. So that's great for the general fund as well. So talking through what your possible project costs are, we talked about assistance in development financing, and this could be a lot of things. We have in Owasso a project where we set up small business enhancements. So when you think about downtown, existing businesses, ways that they can access some of these dollars to make their businesses look better, improve the streetscape, enhanced access, things like that. If there were office space, you could do employment generation assistance. Doesn't look like with the RDG plan, there's going to be a ton of that, but we know we have some potential downtown, of course. And then development project assistance. So if a project comes in that meets a goal that the council has for this development, maybe it's affordable housing, you want to incentivize that and allow them to collect some of the increment they generate back. That's something you could do in this project as well.
I think that was really the intention with this proposal that we got for the Gray Street properties, is that the whole idea of putting that into a TIF is so that we can kind of mandate or require a certain percentage be affordable housing. And so I think
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah, and maybe it's, you can receive and I'm just throwing out numbers, so don't hold me to these, but maybe you could receive a development assistance equal to the amount of the increment you generate, 80% of that.
Right.
But 90% if it's affordable, or, something like that to incentivize the affordable piece or workforce housing.
I agree completely. Councilmember
Yeah,
Gray.
I was gonna add to the workforce, like a spectrum of housing options, affordable workforce. And also, I would say with small businesses, especially east of Porter,
Mm-hmm.
there are requests for street trees, inset parking, better crosswalks, maybe even a mural for a crosswalk, improved alley, cause it's behind the 400 block of Main, pretty rough back there. And then neighborhood wise, there were requests for like sidewalks and lighting, so I could see some of this going in to improve the walkability and safety of like the neighborhoods between this new Griffin housing situation all the way down to downtown, or at least on the east side of the tracks.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really your public infrastructure. So maybe it's sidewalks, landscaping, things like that. If there's some stormwater or water improvements, sewer improvements, things that are needed down there. We talked about the chapel restoration before, and that's part of that historic piece in the RDG plan. Public park improvements, we talked about maybe pulling in Andrews Park at one time into this, which could also be done. We just have to keep in mind, there's only going to be so much money generated, but there may be ways to pull other council goals into the project and get at least some funding for those.
Councilmember Gray.
I was gonna say, I can tell you Andrews is estimated at 28 million, and I'm sure there'll be 30 million in a year or two.
Oh, absolutely.
But I could see some of the funding going towards that and some of it being Norman forward, especially if this one's gonna be 250 million and we're not really sure what's under Griffin. That might be infrastructure that needs to be improved upon. And the chapel restoration, I'm asking in this budget cycle for a study to see like what it would actually cost. So there's some numbers coming.
Yeah, we don't have them yet, but I think we're close on a lot of things. There's definitely a lot of really good ideas out there. And when we say $200 or $250 million in development, this is really what you're looking at for increment. On these low ends for sales tax and ad valorem tax, that was what I provided to you last time, just based on my very conservative guess with the ULI plan. Using these numbers, we're obviously looking at quite a bit more, maybe up to $126 million generated over 25 years. This was the budget we looked at last time, so it would just be a matter of allocating that top end number among these categories, kind of in accordance with council direction and policy. As we do that, I think, obviously I know that there's an ongoing cooperative effort with RDG to finish this plan, and with the state, especially trying to figure out how to unload this land from them, how to purchase some of the land by the city, and how to maybe rezone Griffin to make it more developable and easier for them to be able to sell it off in a way that works for council and works for the TIF. So we need to continue that and identify costs for all those public improvements, as we said. I have a draft project plan with a lot of holes in it, just waiting for this information to fill in. So it'll be relatively quick once we identify these missing pieces. But we also would recommend a policy guide. This can be really helpful. I was working with a city just last week who was nearing the last 10 years of a TIF, and they had a declining amount of development assistance based on how late in the TIF you were building the project. That made some sense, although we were amending it to be fair because they haven't had as much development as they thought. But there are ways to identify both the parameters for the business enhancement money, development assistance, the affordable housing piece or workforce housing piece. If you want to incentivize more of that, maybe it's more increment, as I said before, that they're entitled to, things like that. And so that would all get put in a policy guide. And so everyone's working from the same plan from the get-go that way. And that makes it really easy when a project comes forward to be able to hand that to someone and say, this is what we can do.
I think we've run into that issue on Center City.
Yeah.
Seeing how do you delegate, how do you disperse the funds once they're in the bank?
Yeah,
It's been a real challenge.
it's really challenging. And so what we've done in other cities is really the policy is tied to your project. So whatever increment you generate with your project, you get some portion of that back. And that way you're not worried about, are we gonna have enough money to do this project down the road? It's just whatever's generated by that project. And that makes a lot of sense, I think. It makes it really easy, and you don't have to typically issue debt for that kind of thing. You're pledging those future increment revenues to the developer, and they're getting their own financing. So that kind of helps with a lot of things from the city standpoint. So that's where I'm at. I know it feels like it's going slow. We've worked on Griffin. When I was here, we started in 2014, 2015, so it has been a long time. But it feels like we're slowly moving in the right direction. We just need a few more pieces to fall.
I agree. On the sales tax generation piece, how did you come up with those numbers? Was that basically just all retail, or did you consider any sales tax from the residential? Because if we have
No.
2,000 housing units in this, and people order things off Amazon, and we collect the sales tax from that.
Yeah.
I asked because it's potentially that $11 to $16 million could be substantially more.
Yeah, you could pledge the use tax for those online orders as well. I did not include that in here. I didn't venture a guess as to what that might be, but you certainly could. That's allowed by the Local Development Act. So that's something we can look at as we get more information about.
So potentially it could be much less than 60% of sales tax just to generate that same number,
Yeah.
or vice versa.
Or you could
keep it at
generate more.
60%.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Councilman Holman.
Okay, a couple of questions. So I mentioned before about the TIF boundary and whether it could include the East Side Walmart. And just because I know it's an existing entity that has an existing tax base, but if 2,000 new housing units, which could equate to however many more thousand residents living across the street from that Walmart, if that was included, whatever, as it develops and there's more people living there that might be shopping at that Walmart, would it be wise to try to include it to help boost that TIF's revenue? And in a way to help use a Walmart, which can sometimes be a negative for
Extract.
locally owned downtown core businesses, to help, I guess, kind of put some of that revenue back into investing into the core area. And the same thing with like on the 12th in Alameda there, Chick-fil-A and Del Taco and Walgreens. If there's that many more people living over there, theoretically, I guess they might see increased sales, but maybe it's not enough to even really, from their current baseline, that they would, so maybe it's not.
You could include it, yes. I did not include it because I was trying to be protective of existing sales tax generation businesses in Norman. And that could be a real benefit just to the general fund, to be able to get all that money into the general fund rather than siphoning it off. But it could be included, yeah.
And maybe it's not 100%, but
Yeah.
if it was, maybe that's one thing to consider, just to a big revenue generating thing like that, harnessing some of that, putting it back in, maybe to improve that area around it. So I was wondering about that, and if it would even be worth looking at. And then, with Lamont School, would that, so what if they wanted to stay in that area and they were interested in building their new school on that campus somewhere? Would they be an entity that could request TIF assistance with building their new facility, even though they're a public charter school? So I don't know how that works legally either, but I know that question's come up too,
Yeah.
at least I've heard.
I think it's more of a policy question than a legal question. They don't generate any increment because they're tax exempt. So if your policy is you're entitled to receive some of the increment you generate back as development assistance, they wouldn't have anything to give back. Could it be done? It could be done as more on the public side, public improvement type thing. I know there's some TIFs where cities will use TIF funds to assist schools in other cities, so it's technically possible, yes, but it's just a policy question for council whether or not you want to siphon money from other projects.
Something that doesn't
Potentially
generate any.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something that's not tax generating.
I don't think they want to stay in that area, but I thought it was a question to ask about. And then also, so Main Street, two-way. Main Street is one way for 6 blocks. Half of it, 3 blocks are in the Center City TIF. The other half would potentially be in this TIF. We've talked about whether we could pay for the cost of a two-way. We did one 9 years ago, but on a feasibility implementation study. But if we could use TIF funds to not only do the planning for Main Street two-way, but if we could use TIF funds to actually pay for that project. But the question was, since it's half in one area and half in another, like right now it's half in the Center City TIF, half not, and so there was a question about could we use Center City TIF funds to pay for Main Street two-way, even though half of it's not in the Center City TIF, and they're kind of unclear.
Yeah, so the funds would have to be spent within the project area, so Center City couldn't go east of the railroad tracks and be spent outside of the project area. I also think there might be a question, I'd have to look at that project plan again, as to what was contemplated by that, if that contemplated projects that large. And that might be just something for further discussion for council. But in this TIF, yes, you could write in public infrastructure, that's certainly an approved project cost authorized under the Local Development Act, so you could include it in the project plan and cover that. I know that's an expensive project, so it's just a matter of, what impact does that have on the rest of the development that you all want to help spur and assist with these TIF funds. But definitely that's something that we could talk about.
I know in Center City TIF, or Center City Plan, the Main Street one-way was the first thing the consultants actually noted about was, this is a big problem for your downtown. If you want to have increased economic development, the one-way street's really going to continue to hold you back. And so being able to design it and possibly fund it, which theoretically would be cheaper than Gray Street because we don't have to redo the sidewalks and everything like we're having to do right now. But yeah, how, if it was in two separate TIF areas, does like one pay for half and the other pay for the other half, or how that might work?
Yeah, you'd be limited on expenditures within the project area only for each TIF. certainly, so it would have to be split if it could be, if Center City funds could be used for it at all.
Because it's
Yeah.
two separate, okay. Alright. But TIF funds can be used for studies and plans.
Yes,
Yeah.
Well, I think that's even more critical. We talked about the intersection of Main and Porter. If we're trying to encourage investment and everything, you gotta be able to access Main Street from Porter.
Yeah.
Currently, it's a dead end for all intents and purposes, so. Councilman Graham.
I'm leaning more towards ad valorem, just because what you encumber with the, TIF policy. I like the idea of having flexibility in the general fund and also protecting it. I talked to Anthony a few weeks ago about the 5-year outlook, and then the other TIF is coming online in about 5 years. He said we'll start to feel the effects, and it's not looking great. So I'm just very mindful about using sales tax. And if we did, I would like to be under 25%.
yeah, I mean, this, because of the number of units proposed for Griffin, it will be heavily ad valorem tax funded, no matter what percentage is in sales tax hit.
But I think even a lower sales tax percentage, it makes more logical sense to then loop in a Walmart or something, because if you're protecting 75% of it, 25 is going into the TIF. It's just a lot easier pill to swallow than to say, well, now Walmart's diverted
Yeah.
100% from the general fund into this, which is, it's already coming into the general fund. It's not like other TIF districts where that sales tax number is zero currently. I mean, it's multi-million dollars, whatever that number is. So I think, the lower the sales tax percentage that we could do to get the project over the finish line. I mean, I think that's the balance.
And I would just add to go ahead and build up the coffers with those funds instead of taking on any additional debt to build the infrastructure that we want. So that way we're not servicing debt with that money
I
down the
agree
road.
completely.
And I think at that point, you're probably looking at 10% instead of 25.
Also,
Yep, Councilmember Graham.
can you borrow against your TIF funds?
you can.
Is that like interest on that borrowing?
Yeah, and depending on how assured you are with the revenues or the bank is, the interest rate will vary. If it's speculative, it's gonna obviously be a really high interest rate, but if you have development plans and timelines and hard and fast construction numbers, things like that, it's a little easier to borrow and say this is what's gonna be built and have some assurance. But in an area like Griffin where there's nothing right now that's, it's all gonna be new build, it could be challenging at first. So you might just need to get a project or two going before you have some increment revenue stream to
Or show that, it's generating money?
yeah. It all depends on the borrowing environment too. I know Josh knows about this, Councilmember Hinkle, sorry. So it's, it all depends on the environment that we're in, but that definitely can be an issue if it's too speculative to get banks to jump in on that.
Makes sense. Well, we appreciate the work as always. Just keep the ball moving down the road a little bit, and if there's anything we can do, just let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you all.
Likewise. Hope everything's good on your end. Okay, so item number 2 is going to be a discussion regarding minimum lot sizes for residential development. I believe Ms. Jane Hudson has a small presentation, and if I remember correctly, this is the same presentation that was presented at CPTC in January.
It is, good afternoon. It is, but there's some additional information at the
Excellent.
end of it.
Well, just so everybody knows, this is a topic that I wanted to have come to Baca. Didn't realize it had gone to CPTC, and so just wanting to get another swing at it.
How do you make it full screen if it's a PDF?
F10?
Control enter.
Control interest.
F11?
It's all right.
Alt enter?
Okay. Go with this. Thank you. So yes, like you said, this will be essentially the same presentation that we had before, and it's the discussion regarding we're kind of expanding it in the sense we were talking about minimum lot size. I think initially we started talking about ADUs and the possibility of how, if a property owner wanted to subdivide the property, sell off the back that had the ADU and everything. And once you sell off the back, and I don't think I ever said this at the other meeting, talking to staff about it, but once you sell off that back lot, it's no longer an ADU. It becomes the primary structure for that new lot. So it has different setbacks and stuff like that. So just to go through this quickly. Did we get it? Sorry. I know we were trying to. Thank you.
See, it was so close.
What was it?
Control L. I would've gotten there eventually.
So the two scenarios that we talked about previously is obviously the greenfield development, somebody's coming in and they're going to plat it, and this probably comes into the discussion when we were talking about, instead of having 5,000-6,000 square foot requirements for lots, moving forward as we go into our pro-housing grant, we get to redo the zoning code and the subdivision regulations and everything. We could be looking at 2,000 square feet, 1,000, whatever, we end up with that. And then, of course, the infill development, like we talked about before, and that's dividing the existing lot into smaller lots. But then we go into the requirements of whether or not they're actually going to meet the current regulations that we have in place. Obviously, whenever we're developing, it's the must-haves for each development. Street frontage, we have to have a location for solid waste collection, emergency vehicles, utility access. Again, this goes back to meeting the setbacks and the coverage for the lots. As these plats have been developed over the years, the coverage and the calculations for runoff were done so with the understanding that it was, at a 65% coverage. You start taking lots and dividing them off, you're ending up with 65% lots that are covered at 65%. If someone does have a lot large enough that they could subdivide it off, they would still be required to plat. Typically, they would be able to do the short form plat. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, but when you're looking at the short form plat, you're looking at to make sure that they have public services in place. Water, sewer, sidewalks are there, if curb and gutter is required and stuff like that. But that's just, like I said, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. So at the last meeting, I had a few of these examples. This is one of the most recent ones, like in the last 12 years probably. This is Fountain View North, and this just references, we were talking about the frontage, and so these have 10-foot flag lots that bring their individual lots down to the street. And this can be done. Obviously we do this, so this is how these 4 lots in the back achieved their frontage requirements, and then of course the 2 at the bottom have the frontage there.
So that's not a street down the middle, that's 4 individual drives essentially that go into the.
Right, but it's 40 feet? Yeah, so you've got 40 feet.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's an access easement. It's got a 30 foot, is it 30 feet? Anyway,
No, it makes
There's-
sense, yeah.
there's your easement. Then we also had one that was done over on Berry. This was done just in the last 5 years, I think. The applicant came forward and they had this lot, and as you can see, they've got the flag lot that comes up. And the main concerns, like we talked about last time, is if you have 2 people that are doing this together and they want to develop into 2 lots, and then one of them sells, and then there's an easement that they don't want somebody to cross anymore, and it really does create a problem. So in this case, clearly they both had frontage to Berry Road there. This is another one that we did just in the last couple of years. This is just east of the intersection of Berry and Lindsay, on the south side of Lindsay there. They came forward, and there was an existing house on one of these lots, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which one it is, but there was an existing house, and then they came in and did this plat, and this back lot down here has the flag going up to meet Lindsay, and so they got their frontage by doing that. But this was probably, let's say on there, how many, we've got probably 2.5 acres, something like that, that they were able to utilize that extra space.
Big lots.
I put this one in, this is 904 Miller, and this is in the historic district area. But I just used it as an example for, this is the old one, and they have redeveloped this lot. And if you subdivided this between those two structures there, again, that goes into the issue of creating these smaller lots. The unintended consequences, I've gone over that before. It's the water and sewer connections that you're going to be impacting, the setbacks, and again, the drainage, the coverage that could result in drainage issues. I put a couple in here too that had some examples. This is a corner lot. They do have 22 feet on the side, so you could get the flag, or you could even use Berry Road probably as the, as the frontage, but then have the drive come off of the side street there. But, when you look at it further, you've got water in the front, and you've got the sewer in the back.
Yep.
So, how do you break that up?
You can have a curb cut too close to the intersection.
Right.
Yeah, there's, yeah.
And same thing here. I was just trying to find a couple of lots here in town that while they look great to do something like that, you start getting into some of those concerns with how are you going to access some of that other stuff. Under unintended consequences, again, I just said last time, I'm genuinely concerned with some of the opportunities that might come up for people to come in and demolish some of our existing housing stock just to be able to do this. And I don't want that to happen either. I do want to increase the density, but so we've just got to figure out the happy medium on how to get to where we want to be. And my slides aren't on there.
Yeah, this is the old.
This is the old one. I had some more slides which simply just explained the stuff that I just went through there. That's interesting.
We did such a good job explaining. I don't know if we get the slides.
Anyway, they were just, really, they were just saying the same thing about how we cut them off and we're losing our required setbacks from the front and the rear and so on and so forth. So,
While you're looking for that, Councilmember Green.
I know the core was kind of the focus in this, but could this be done elsewhere in Norman besides the core?
Yeah, anywhere that they could meet the requirements for the setbacks or whatever we, determine we want to have moving forward with this. Yeah, I mean, they could, if they have that access to the public utilities and such.
Would HOAs or potentially neighbors or anybody fight somebody trying to do?
Yeah, I'm sure there'd be requirements for HOAs. I don't know what that would be. I mean, some of them may actually say, you can't have a lot smaller than X within that HOA, so.
Okay, so potentially could be prohibited by HOAs. And where else you could put it, I guess, I don't know where all the HOAs are, but I guess would this also end up in medium density, or how we're working on AIM and trying to figure out like where it's appropriate to put extra density? There could be some overlap there in other part, like in the suburbs, or is that supposed to be like low density and it's not supposed to increase?
Well, no, I mean, right now we can do the ADUs. So again, going back to that discussion, is it an ADU or is it becoming a primary structure? So, but they can do the ADUs if they can meet the requirements now, or anything. But the majority of the goal of AIM was to increase the density within the urbanized area. So that is, what we've been looking at and upping some of those land use designations.
So potentially could be elsewhere outside of the core as long as it's not prohibited by HOA, and would not have the other unintended consequences of like the impervious coverage, setback, all that stuff.
Yeah, to me, this was two primary areas. One, it was the core lots that are on an alley, and you've got a back, the back facing lot on the alley. You're able to build an ADU and then sell that ADU off fee simple, basically using just a traditional mortgage FHA loan kind of thing. lower the barrier to home ownership. But the flip side was to do entire neighborhoods, from a green field to go in and say, you want to do a subdivision. It's great. Well, now you have a minimum lot size that is not 3,500 square feet is the current minimum lot size?
5 and 6, well, depending on your zoning, but yeah.
I was thinking just for R1. So it's
Use
6,000.
those
So,
would be-
and you could go
Yeah.
from 6,000 to maybe even down to 1,000. So you're getting 6 times as many lots in a subdivision on the edge of town that you were originally. So it's kind of a twofold approach. It's just get more housing, customer home.
Yeah, that's definitely how I'd view it as well, as not being so much about the core, but more so making better, more efficient use out of when there is greenfield development, that we could maximize, that there would at least be the ability to do 1,000 or even less. I mean,
Yeah.
a whole neighborhood of tiny homes on tiny lots, and then you don't have to live in a neighborhood if that's not what
That's
you want,
right.
but.
Developers don't have to build it either.
But right now, we're, there is a path where I guess you could do that by going through all our hoops and stuff, but, the standard is, 6,000 or whatever, but yeah, and so, I think the intent is really new development
Yeah.
that's from a empty piece of property, and then being able to design it from the ground up from that way. And then if there's parts of town or like individual spots in the core area, like the Miller one, where there's an alleyway, and then there's that, and it faces a front, a side street, and an alleyway on
Yeah.
3 sides. So, but yeah, I definitely don't view this as really increasing density in the core, more so than making better, more efficient use of any new developments on the edge if they happen.
It's definitely twofold. But yeah, I'm with Councilmember Holm on that.
And like I said, they can come in for the ADUs right now. But, as far as AIM and the discussions that we've had, and we've had them for years now, I want to say it's at least been 5 years that when we do see PUDs coming through, that's what they're including now. They're saying ADUs or second units and stuff like that. So they're recognizing that that's definitely in the market now. But moving forward, whenever we do start the process to update the subdivision regulations and the zoning code, because those requirements are in both of them right now, so they both have to be updated. We've heard multiple times we've got to reduce those required square footages that we have for just straight single family, and so that will be one of our goals as we move forward with those updates.
I appreciate you saying that. It's huge. And that's why, I keep wrestling with what does the minimum lot size number need to be? Originally, I had landed on 1,000 because it was tied back to the ADU idea. If we've got a 65% impervious coverage restriction, 1,000 and a 650 square foot ADU restriction, 650 square feet is 65% of 1,000, and so it was a natural conclusion to come to 1,000. But the more and more I talk about it or think about it, I don't know that we need to assign a number to it. I think we allow whatever the market will bear, and if a developer decides they can build 200 square foot lots and build a 100 square foot shack on it, who are we to say that it's their risk, it's their capital, it's their development. All that to say, I don't know what the number should be. I keep going back and forth on what I think are
But
logical.
If when they submit their preliminary plat and their drainage reports and their engineering reports and WQPC, whatever they have to meet, if those are approved through engineering review, whether it's 1,000, whether it's 2,000, or whether there is no, because maybe it's 1,000 in one
Right.
development area A, development area B, it's 2,000,
This is gonna be my
development.
next question.
So yeah, if you didn't have, if you had at least 1,000, let's say that was the minimum, then they would just start building on that and have different designs within that subdivision preliminary plat that came forward that.
I think it's, yeah, that's perfect. Councilmember Holland.
As I say, I think the neighborhood I live in was built in the early 50s, so before I think we probably had, I don't know when the minimum lots regulation went in, probably in the 50s, I guess, right? 54. So I think my neighborhood was built right before then. So I don't know why they did it this way, but like the house I live in only covers 10% of the lot. And I'm like, right next to the stadium, right next to campus. So I view that as I could expand the house I live in by 5 times. under R3 zoning too, which it's in. So it's like I could massively expand that house without my neighbors having any idea what I might be doing. They may not even know that I could do that, even though they're all students, so I don't think they care, but it's like, you know, if people are having to build these lots and then they build a house like this, then neighbors might not ever know that they could add a massive addition to it by right even. And then if you have smaller lots that are built specifically to be smaller like that, that maybe gives some more protection to neighbors to know that there's not gonna be an addition to that house that's 5 times larger than the original house that was there, something like that, so.
I think that's what you're seeing. That's what Center City was in response to.
Yeah.
Tearing down smaller, more affordable homes to build these massive things that the neighbors just really had a hard time with.
Yeah.
And so if you were able to do it from the very beginning and kind of set the standard,
And which had to meet our current subdivision, like,
Right.
before the Center City policy, those new ones were 2-story and
Setback.
had to have setbacks.
Yep.
25 and 50 and 5 on each side, and could only be 2 stories, I think, and so.
And now there's a real tension between those projects and the new Center City projects and how the dynamic with the street and how they're related to the neighbor, it just doesn't flow, it doesn't jive how it should. So.
Okay.
Sorry, went off on a tangent there.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. So I mean, I think I know, you know, the concerns and the interests that you have, collectively you have, you know, as you wanna move forward with this. So, we've kind of got our notebook of goals that, you know, we know that need to be addressed as we move forward. Do you want to add anything?
Not a lot, but engineering has concerns about alley access, I guess, just because of addressing. In emergency situations, being able to find where that is. We think that's a substandard street, so I know I've heard of other cities, you know, giving their alleys street names and getting around that. At this point, we're really not in favor of that, but that's kind of council's direction more than ours, I guess.
Could you do half addresses, like 231 and a half, or is that super confusing?
Maybe, but they still have to know how to get there, and if their only access is from the alley and they're coming to the main house, then that's kind of an issue.
I think that's also a broader conversation that we've had at a council level about how do we elevate the alleys in Norman and make them primary streets. And so maybe this is an opportunity to, I mean, dollars, obviously you gotta find the money to do it, but rehabbing all the alleys and bringing them up to residential standards and actually allowing trash trucks and burying the utilities that are back there and really just getting a nice new clean slate. But did you have a question?
The other thing I just wanted to point out too was the 65%, and that's basically impervious area. So if you have a driveway or sidewalk, any of that, so really 1,000-foot
Fair.
lot.
Yeah.
If you have a 650-foot house, you could have no sidewalk, nothing else. So you got to keep that in mind
That's good.
because drainage is a concern if we get too much impervious area.
That's a good point. Councilman Rowland.
So, I mean, there's one example I can think of, and you showed it on there with the house on Miller, is the Miller Lane is like an alleyway. But there's a bunch of, there's houses that are built on Miller Lane that face Miller Lane.
I think that's actually on the other side. I mean,
Because there's
When you
Miller
cross that-
Avenue
yeah, when you cross
and
that
Miller Lane.
street, I don't,
And
mean, we
then
can look.
Jones after that, but yeah.
I can look, is that it? Yeah, so if you look, Miller Lane is on the north side, I don't think it continues across Farrell. It's really weird. I can
Miller-
verify that.
Yeah, it shows it going all the way to Sims,
But
where
it's,
it dead ends at the parking lot.
but it's designated as an alley on the south side, I think,
And then it stops at Emmeline.
and the street is up there.
So is that something that the neighbors on that section of the street just decided they wanted to make their, I'm sure you don't, yeah, I don't have the answer right now, but.
I have no history on that. We can
Yeah.
find out
Okay,
though.
just kind of
Maple-
curious how that came about.
Maple Lane, Farrell Lane are similar to that, where there's a Farrell Street and then there's a little tiny little Farrell Lane. And then Maple Lane is just between Jones and Miller, and it's got 10 houses that faces, but it's a really tiny little street. So yeah, I mean, but yeah, I agree with staff's concerns about those things, and so making sure that we address
For sure.
those issues with it, that it's not causing that problem, and again, being, I think, really geared more towards someone's building a new development from nothing, and more so trying to go back and
Right.
alter existing, lines and whatnot.
Yeah, I never thought this was gonna be like kind of a blanket change that we could make and it would solve all properties, and so it's exactly what I wanted to bring us back today. I think those are some great points. So-
It could be something that is in all of R1, but you have to meet these 5 things and older areas just might not.
That was gonna be my follow-up question to Jane, was that could you create a new classification, new zoning classification that was R1B, or something that was R1, but it had a more restrictive or unrestrictive, I'm not sure which word I'm looking for, but just a basically a different set of criteria that was geared towards these smaller lots. And so you got less setbacks, you've got, maybe the impervious coverage is a different ratio because they're smaller lots again. Minimum utility sizes even, because we don't, that's the other thing I don't wanna do is overload existing utilities. You've got a sewer line that's in the back here, it's a 12-inch sewer line, and if you had, 100 more houses on it, was that sewer line designed to take all that capacity and everything? And so this is very much a snowball problem, and I didn't think that they were gonna be able to solve it today, but the more questions we get, hopefully the more answers we get. So, Councilmember Grant.
I had a question about impervious surface. So people can apply for a variance on that. How does that process work?
It's Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
So they typically apply the first of the month, and the meeting is at the end of the month. There is a fee similar to
Is it
zoning.
like $100 or?
It could be at $250 to $3. Does it go up to $3?
It's 250 plus certified ownership list.
Yeah.
But that's it, you don't have to go to planning commission or council or anything beyond that.
No, you just go to board, and they notify the neighbors just like we do. Planning
When, what would allow someone to get a variance?
That's a decision on the Board of Adjustment.
They would be looking at with their stormwater drainage plan. And then, I guess with that, if you had a stormwater utility fee and we're addressing stormwater holistically, would it be easier for people in the future to get a variance in these situations?
I don't know, maybe, but what I was gonna say is, we notify the adjacent property owners, and change is good, sometimes change is not good. But most of the time, people are fearful of change, so when they get that notice that somebody's doing something on their property, I think I told you guys about one time we had a applicant going to Board of Adjustment for a carport, and an adjacent property owner that was a renter, that wasn't even a property owner there on that street, raised so much protest that this lady wasn't able to get her carport.
If
And
it's
so,
one, cause we see like the protest map, and usually on my ends, I'm looking for over 50% to even begin to consider, oh, maybe this isn't going forward. But, so one lady was able to tank that process? Is this because it's Board of Adjustment and?
it's been a while, I don't remember
Well,
exactly.
for a little while, to get a carport, you had to go to Board of Adjustment,
Which
and
we
that
took.
has since changed, but that was during that
Yeah.
little stint.
Yeah, just thinking about like if somebody wanted, obviously, I tell people who come to me about the projects that they're working on to definitely talk to their neighbors before jumping into anything. But yeah, interesting. Just the whole process and ways you could get it, maybe with a variance or whatever, but then you maybe are fighting your neighbors.
It's a balance of a variance or a total rezoning. That's really.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'm in the wrong place
please.
to get attention.
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to jump in and offer just the legal standard for variances. There is protest, and there's definitely a look at all the case-by-case individual factors, but variances are given in cases of undue hardship, and they're to relieve that hardship, and they're only supposed to be drawn as broadly as necessary to address that, not more. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend relying on variances for an across-the-board kind of change we want to make, because they really should be based on that particular applicant's particular needs. And so in that way, they don't tend to set precedent the same way that interpretation of the zoning ordinance does, because each is a case-by-case change to the zoning ordinance. So, anyway, thank you.
No, it makes sense. Thank you for saying that. Okay, are there any other questions or further discussion from council? All right, I'm seeing none, so we'll just continue to have this discussion and revisit maybe in next month or the month after, after you look at some of these unique streets and cases. But other than that, Councilman Holman.
Just, I'm definitely interested on board with not having a set number, but I would like to see if there's some other cities that don't have a minimum lot size and what their experience has been.
Well, and to that point, I don't know if this data is easily readily available, but if you're able to draw a parallel between cities that have no minimum lot size and the amount of housing they're able to build versus those that have very stringent rules and the amount of housing there. Again, I don't know if that data is going to be easily discovered, but I know Minneapolis recently, they abolished single-family zoning altogether, and they've just had a housing boom. Like, I think 10,000 houses are getting built a month up there. It's just crazy how it just exploded because they took this one policy off. And so I don't know if we've got a similar kind of apples to apples
I
comparison.
think they also have some financial incentives.
There's several. They got great public transportation. They've got a lot of things that work for their system up there. But
And Austin, I don't know what they're well, they've been approving a lot of housing, but they're one of the big cities in the nation that has seen a decline in rents over the last 3 years.
that's interesting. Decline in rents.
Austin has been seeing a decline in rents. They're one of the few large cities that have
Decline in
actually been
demand,
seeing a
that's what it
decline.
is.
They're not seeing a population decrease, but they're building a lot of housing rapidly.
It's interesting.
So,
Well, their downtown is like all downtowns. People are starting to leave.
oh yeah, their skyline's bigger than Dallas.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. All right. Well, if there's no other comments or questions, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Great.